Hello, my name is Rafael Seiz Ortiz from Universidad Politécnica de Valencia, and in this technical English unit I'm going to deal with some guidelines, useful guidelines for oral presentations. I will start with some criteria that are useful for effective presentations, and then I will give you some advice for delivering and preparing these oral presentations. And I will finish with some useful links, resources that you can find online. The objectives are to discuss some fundamental aspects that are important to take into account when presenting, when preparing and delivering presentations, to assist the preparation and delivery of these oral presentations. And also it is important to bear in mind some advice regarding oral presentations. We have classified the different criteria under different headings. The first one is organization. The presentation must be clear, logical, and organized, so that the listeners, the people that are listening, can follow very clearly the line of reasoning of the speaker. The key ideas must be developed in a clear and organized way. This is very important for any type of presentation. The second set of criteria has to do with the style of the presentation. We have to bear in mind that a presentation, an oral presentation, is a kind of planned conversation, so it must flow. So you are not allowed to simply read from notes or from the slides, and it is not possible to improvise if you want to give an effective presentation. And the speaker can be heard clearly by the audience. I mean, it has to be a kind of flow and an interaction between the speaker and the listeners. That's why we say it's a kind of planned conversation. Next, we have the use of communication aids. We have a wide range of possibilities: transparencies, slides, posters, handouts, computer-generated materials of any kind, etc. In the case of these aids, the details must be minimized, so that the most important ideas and points are emphasized and stand out very clearly. That's very important. And also they must be prepared in a professional manner. For example, one example is that the font of visual must be large enough to be readable, and the information must be an aid for understanding. So it has to assist understanding of the oral text. And they have, after all, they have to enhance the presentation as a whole. So they are aids or communication tools for the oral text. Next, we have the content. The first part of the content is the depth of content. The speaker must explain the concepts, ideas, and everything, giving examples that are clear and help understanding. And something that we sometimes forget, and is a typical and very important concept for efficient presentations, is that the listeners after the presentation must have learned something they didn't know before. And that is something that we must take into account. Regarding the accuracy of content, we have that all the information contained must be accurate and precise. There should be no errors, of course, and the information must be taken from reliable sources, and normally they must be referenced in the presentation or somewhere. Also, a very important thing is the use of language, grammar and choice of words, grammar and vocabulary, in other words. The sentences, of course, must be grammatically complete and correct, so that the text actually flows easily. The words, the vocabulary, must be carefully chosen and selected. You have to be very certain and very clear about the vocabulary choice. And of course, if you are using specific or technical vocabulary, in our case, it must be correct, appropriate, etc. Regarding personal appearance, this is important as well because it has to be adequate for the occasion and the audience, depending on the circumstances. There must be an adequate body language, and you must use your hands or gestures to assist your words and enhance the presentation when necessary. And last, we have the responsiveness to audience. There must be verbal interaction with the audience. That's very important. The speaker must be responsive and adapt to the audience comments and needs. The questions must be answered, and all the doubts and the problems expressed by the listeners must be clarified, because it's a kind of planned conversation, as we said before. And it's better to establish some kind of eye contact with the audience. It helps with a verbal interaction normally. Now I'm going to move on to some advice for good presentations. You don't have to include too much information on a slide, and it's better not to use whole tables. Tables that are too complicated or too big are a waste of time. And sometimes people speak of the rule of 6 lines per slide or 6 words per line. This is not exactly, it mustn't be respected 100%. It can be 6, 8, 9, but not too much information. You mustn't read from the slide directly because the slides are used to illustrate the point as you are making it in oral form. That's why it is never a good idea to show the slide after you actually make the point. It must be at the same time, because the slide is a clarifying aid. It must clarify your points made orally. Also, you have to be organized, breathe to help you relax before, during and after the presentation, during the questions. And again, you don't try to cover too much material, because this is something very negative normally. You have to speak clearly, slowly, and at an appropriate level regarding according to the audience. Use the appropriate vocabulary and also make eye contact with the members of the audience. It is a good idea to move around and use hand gestures, but provided these movements and gestures help the emphasis or the understanding of the oral points. And you have to remember to greet and thank your audience. And it's a good idea, I think, also to write the text. Even if you are not going to read the text, of course, it is a good help to prepare the presentation. You have to practice the presentation, actually. It's a good idea, I recommend it. It's a good idea to record it on video or audio, because then you can review it and see your errors. And so this is normally a good practice. And last, with all this advice and criteria, it's always a good idea to prepare a kind of personal checklist with which you can review whether and assess whether you followed the advice and the rules of effective presentations. Here you have some useful links, web links that you find online, and they can help you to prepare your presentations or to deliver your presentation. In